Okay, so I think I'll get started. So first of all, I just want to extend a very warm welcome to everyone that has joined the call today. My name is Sonia, and along with my co-lead Alicia Marguri, who is on the call as well, we lead the Solutions for Youth Employment at the World Bank Group. And for those of you that are not familiar with S4YE or Solutions for Youth Employment, this is a global partnership to enhance young people's employment prospects by promoting innovative and proven youth employment solutions. It brings together a broad range of stakeholders, some of who are on the call today, but it includes foundations, bilateral donors, the private sector, NGOs, and research institutions. And so I wanted to start the call today to kind of set a little bit of context as to why we're here today and to give the broader context of the World Bank Group. As many of you may know, the World Bank President, Ajay Banga, has made job creation and employment an explicit arm of World Bank projects. As part of this agenda, there is a strong emphasis on identifying and supporting jobs-related initiatives that are scalable, replicable, and responsive to country demand. The jobs agenda is already being broken down into several internal goals and strategy. And two that I would like to highlight today is one is we have a target that we are meant to reach by 2030, which is called SP 500. It's to reach 500 million people with social protection and employment support by 2030. The second, initiative that I would like to bring in is an upcoming one. We're working on a new skills strategy, which will put the goal of preparing young people for jobs front and center in the bank strategy. So to achieve these goals, the World Bank is also rethinking its delivery approach, including how it collaborates more effectively with external partners to reduce the fragmentation and to maximize impact for the beneficiaries that we reach at the end. So as S4YE, we already have a very long-standing collaboration and relationship with many of stakeholders in the youth employment ecosystem. We engage in knowledge exchange, and we also build a lot of joint products historically. But we want to take this a little bit further. We want to make sure that the important work that are being done by the foundations, that are being done by the NGOs and others can more directly inform World Bank policy dialogue within countries. And so through these peer learning events that we're holding now, we're hoping to achieve two things. One, we would like to promote lively dialogue and joint learning between the World Bank and other stakeholders. But also, we want to explore new practical ways for the World Bank and S4YE to work with these partners in supporting scalable youth employment solutions. So the first few sessions of this series, you will notice, is going to be focused on integrating youth employment solutions into government systems. And then we will also have a few sessions that are focused on work-based learning, which is an area that is of great interest for the bank as well, to kind of explore that. So to kick off the series, we'll be talking with the philanthropic sector today. Foundations are playing an increasingly pivotal role when it comes to funding skilling and livelihoods initiatives for youth. And so we want to learn from them how they think about scaling up, how they are supporting their grantees to work with governments and government systems, and their thoughts on how the philanthropic sector and the World Bank could better work together in the future and collaborate. So for today's session, let me also introduce our panelists and discussant. So first, I would like to just introduce Kevin Starr. He is the CEO of Mulago Foundation and a very big thought leader on scaling. So we're very happy to have him here. I would also like to introduce Paul Wang, who is a core team member of the Agency Fund. And then I would also like to introduce Cynthia Hansen, who is the Managing Director at the Innovation Foundation, which is empowered by the ADECO Group. She is also currently the co-chair for Solutions for Youth Employment, so we're very excited to have her here. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to our moderator, who is Kevin Hempel. I don't think there's enough things that I can say about him, but he, amongst his many hats, is also one of our coordinators and leads for partnerships. So thank you, Kevin, and please.
Thank you, Sonia. And I don't want to lose much time, just very two brief things on the housekeeping. Everyone is muted for now, but the chat is open, and we encourage everyone to, as we have this conversation, and we really envision this to be an organic conversation. So nobody knows really what's going to happen today. Post your thoughts, questions, reactions, disagreements into the chat. We'll try to weave some of that in as we go, as it pops up, and then we'll open it up for sort of live Q&A also towards the end. So just to say, don't hold back, just post it already, and we'll try to maybe pick up some of those in the meantime. If there's something for a very specific panelist, maybe tag them, and we'll try to get to that or afterwards. Yeah, it's recorded, but nobody should be shy. So we'll try to stay open and candid and have a and see where the conversation goes. So with that being said, I wanna just get going, because we have an hour and we want to make the most of it. And so I want to start, because not everyone is maybe familiar with each of the organizations on the panel. And so just maybe very quickly, for those in the audience who don't know Mulago, Kevin, I'll start with you. Maybe just give us a 1 minute about Mulago Foundation, and more importantly, maybe about your philosophy, so that we understand a little bit how you operate. And then, of course, I encourage everyone, just look up Mulago Agency Fund, etc., on separately afterwards to get more. But Kevin, let's start with you.
All right. Well, fundamentally, what we do is we try to find founders who have an idea that we think is tackling a really important problem of the poor, and that can achieve exponential scale. And when we find somebody who we believe has that and can deliver it, we have a fellows program that works as an accelerator for them. We work with them for a year, and then we, at the end of that year, decide whether it's a funding fit for us. In other words, do we think there in fact is a scalable solution? Do we think they have a workable strategy? And do we think there's somebody who could deliver it? And then the great good fortune we have is we can fund long-term on that journey to scale.
And maybe one follow-up quickly. So that's kind of your philosophy, and maybe why? I mean, so how have you come to that? Because obviously, as a foundation, you have many options, but how have you come to narrow in on that particular strategy?
Well, the problems are big, the time is short, and the resources are limited. So we better focus on stuff that can scale up.
All right. So Paul, over to you. Same question. Very brief intro on Agency Fund and your philosophy overall, so we all a bit on the same page.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to be on this call and to meet everyone. So I work for the Agency Fund, and the easiest way to think of us is as what we call ourselves a funder-doer. So the funder side is that we work with a network of philanthropies like Kevin's and others to recommend giving opportunities to funders. So we facilitate grant making. But then on the doer side, we have a team of about 18 data scientists, software engineers, social scientists, psychologists, product managers, and so forth. And we'll do hands-on projects, usually tech or data related projects with organizations we support. So it could be building a data system or building an AI tool or building an app or these sorts of things. So it's this combination of kind of grant making and technical projects that enables us to kind of maybe have a bit of a niche in the overall ecosystem. And then I personally lead the livelihood work at Agency Funds. So that includes work around finding better ways to measure livelihood outcomes, partnerships with tech companies to share data and access data on job seekers and young people, partnerships with the World Bank and governments, and then a variety of different types of NGO support for NGOs focused on livelihoods.
All right, thank you both. And let's move into, so Kevin, you brought up the issue of scale, and the problems are big. So let me ask you a question. when we think about the sector overall and the philanthropic community, or the development community at large, we often talk about innovation, finding solutions. You know, you both mentioned that as well, finding big ideas that have potential. But one of the articles, I think it's one of the first ones I ever read from your work, and it goes back to 2018, and that was that article was titled "Enough Innovation Already." And so I wanna ask, because as you invest, as you find your ideas and try to bring them to scale, do you see that we are too obsessed with innovation at the expense of maybe focusing on replication and scalability? How do you look at that?
Well, I don't think it's a binary, actually. And that article was really a reaction to the observation that a lot of innovations just simply weren't scaling. So it wasn't really speaking against the importance of innovation. It was just that if we're gonna take the trouble to develop and prove these innovations, well, it's a waste if we can't scale them up. And so who's really supposed to do that? And I was just seeing a lot of, especially from the sort of randomista community, a lot of pilots, and that just really didn't have any strategy attached to them on how they were to go anywhere. And so it seemed like, okay, we've got a big emphasis in the sector on innovation, but we don't seem to have a big emphasis on what we would think of as scaling. So,
And
it's funny because we do innovation. That's our whole world is working with founders who have innovations. But noticing the sector was seeing in the sector that those innovations had nowhere to go if there wasn't an overall emphasis on scaling them up.
And have you seen any improvement? I mean, like I said, that article I think is 2018, right? I mean, have you seen a shift in the sector?
Nope, not really.
All right. Paul, what about you? You mentioned it too, and I think when I've seen some of your calls for proposals, I do see also that double emphasis, right? You do fund early stage ideas, proof of concept type stuff, but you also, like you were explaining, you're trying to help organizations grow and take these models to scale. How do you think about that continuum, between getting the new ideas out there, but also growing them and making them big?
Yeah. Well, first, I would make a comment about scale, that if we're talking about livelihoods, we're talking about an issue that's like hundreds of millions of people that we're talking about, and that's a scale that's far bigger than what an organization like Agency Fund could directly address. So I would say, we have to look at the innovation side, but a lot of the innovation that we're looking at is innovation that would enable better scaling, maybe through other actors that do have larger reach and scale, like the bank or governments. So, for example, we're doing a lot of work on just how to measure economic outcomes better. Because if we can't measure economic outcomes like income or wealth or consumption, then everyone's flying blind for this massive issue. We do actually have a partnership with the World Bank, and we're trying to form partnerships with governments to really formally treat the NGO sector as an innovation sector, but then to streamline the translation of those innovations or the uptake of those innovations into these other ecosystems that can reach scale. So I think there's always, I agree with Kevin Starr. It's not like an either or, but it is frustrating to see a lot of interesting innovation work just stay at the innovation stage. And I would say a lot of the innovation that we are focused on is to enable scaling, potentially by teeing up or just creating a better environment for larger actors like governments and the World Bank.
Kevin,
All
can I
right,
ask a quick question just as a follow
please.
on?
Yeah.
So I was just curious from both of you if you think that the inability to scale or the low volume of scale is ultimately tied to existing funding models. And like if there was unlimited funding or other kinds of resources, would that solve the problem? Or is that only one piece of the puzzle?
I personally think that's only one piece of the puzzle. And if we're talking about livelihoods, it's more complicated also
Mhm.
because we're talking about oftentimes we're talking about programs where quality matters a lot. And so that's more than just throwing money at a type of program, but it needs to be implemented with quality. We have this hugely difficult challenge around general equilibrium outcomes. So you could throw your money also at like all sorts of training programs, for example, which may just be shifting the deck chairs and not achieving, outcomes. And then also, many times programs need to be adapted to context, especially in livelihoods. So, I also have background in the Randomista crew back in my day, but we've been writing an agency fund about how kind of a mindset of you nail an intervention and you just scale that intervention without adapting it and improving it over time and space won't work. So definitely resources is important, but it's very difficult to scale in the livelihood space as well. It's very difficult to scale well.
Yeah, totally agree. I feel like often people use that, oh, the money ran out as actually an excuse for not having thought through all the eventualities and the system change that needs to happen. Sorry, Kevin, back to you.
No, and maybe, I mean, just feeding off that, because we talk about scale, but sometimes I think we also maybe thinking about it in different ways, and how that pathway plays out, and especially in sort of intervention that are not just mere mechanic, let's say maybe like a vaccine, right? We still have last mile problems to get it out, but we have human service essentially programming a lot in the skilling and livelihood space. So Kevin, let me put it back to you. You write a lot about scale. One of the things you've coined in your articles is around thinking about funder at scale and doer at scale. You've also said that we need to design for what governments can do and are willing to pay for. Just walk us through a little bit what you've learned over the years and how you've come to think about that process and that continuum from moving from an idea into something that can get really big and serve the scale, as Paul mentioned, that that really is consistent with the need.
Okay, well, the first point is to define scale, of course, and we don't mean scale is just a synonym for growth. Scale is the sustained acceleration of impact through an idea. So it's going exponential. And the first and critical question to ask, as you brought up, is, well, what's your dream for this idea? And at the level of that dream, the achievement of that idea's full potential, who is the doer at scale and who's the payer at scale? And when we think about payer at scale, we used to teach that there's three choices. There's governments delivering that idea, implementing an idea. There is nonprofits delivering that idea. And if it's a for-profit idea, it's the market. Increasingly, and we wrote about this, we just didn't see that happening in the NGO sector. There is not some way to coordinate it so ideas really take off and scale in some kind of coherent way. And so now we really think about it being markets and governments. And then we thought that the payers were, well, if it's a for-profit idea, it's customers. If it's not a for-profit idea, maybe governments pay for it with their revenues, maybe big aid pay for it, and maybe philanthropy pays for it. But kind of as Paul just implied, philanthropy isn't big enough to scale stuff up, but it can develop new ideas, prove them out, and set them on the path to scale. big aid is kind of gone. So now we're talking about government revenues or customers. So we're really, again, focused on those two routes to scale. And once you know who the doer and payer is, you can start asking scalability questions. The first is it good enough? Is the impact actually proven so it's worth taking to scale? Is it big enough? In other words, are there big enough doers and payers that this idea has real potential to go big? And are there constraints to it that wouldn't allow it to go big or not? And then simple enough is it simple enough for, say, a government to actually deliver? And is it cheap enough for whomever the payer, would they be willing to pay it? And that's different than cost effectiveness, by the way, because cost effectiveness is some more abstractive idea about whether it is makes good enough use for the money, but that doesn't tell you if somebody's actually willing to pay for it. So that's kind of soup to nuts how we think about scale. And then once you know that, you can really start thinking about a given organization's strategy to achieve that dream that includes the doer and payer and somehow getting ever closer to the potential of that idea.
All right, thank you. Paul, how do you think about it? Is it similar? Are there specific steps or enablers in that process that you think about are key? Building on what Kevin is saying.
Yeah, I'll build on what Kevin said because he said a lot of things that make a lot of sense. But at least one thing that we've been seeing that could play a much bigger role than it currently does is the role of technology to enable good implementation at scale. So again, we can all envision a typical like training or education program. And typically those programs really, they have to be implemented well. And so if you have an actor like a government saying, we're going to implement this for hundreds of thousands of people, almost the first question you ask is, well, how well are they going to implement? And I do think it's underexplored just how much technology can, one, just help the people delivering these programs to implement well. And then second, to monitor for a third party, to give a sense of just the quality of implementation across all the different points in time and location that a certain program might be running. So to give a practical example, we've been playing around with audio recordings. And there's a whole list of ways you could use audio, but and we've kind of documented those out and we're playing around with it, but we've also demonstrated that it's pretty easy actually with a very basic phone. You don't need special equipment to pick up meaningful audio of what might be happening in a setting. And then what you do with the audio is there's a whole world there. But that's like just one example to say, a device can help deliver a program, but then can also help monitor a program. And then finally on kind of the doer payer, our hypothesis is that this may be one of the last things that you actually hand over, say, to a government to run themselves, like the technology and the monitoring. There might be different components of a program that might be easier to hand over earlier, and then with the acknowledgement that certain other components, if you get to that stage, you may hand it over later. But just keeping your finger on the kind of technology, maintaining it and using it, it may be one of those things that, at least if you're scaling through government, you may still house it at a third party for a little while longer.
And is that, just following up on that, is that, I guess, what implies the TA part? You often, the technical assistance part, you're delivering the doer part, I think, in your sort of your model where, because if I understand correctly, a lot of your work with your partners is around helping them enhance the sort of data technology research capabilities in the end, right? Like I saw recently some your work you were doing helping them do better A/B testing, for instance, right? I mean, so maybe help us understand how you see that capability in your partners as like a crucial enabler for taking whatever their specific intervention is and, working with government in, translating that and delivering at quality.
Yeah, that's definitely part of the thinking. And it returns to something Kevin Starr said, where, we're trying to envision who's the doer and payer at scale. And so if we're working with an NGO at scale, usually we're not thinking it's the NGO that's the main doer. But still that NGO can have certain sorts of expertise. The NGO itself can be the provider of technical assistance and support to an entity like a government. And so if the NGO itself can own a technology, maintain a technology, can use a technology well in service of, a larger entity that's doing the frontline implementation, that's definitely a scenario that we've seen on occasion and we foresee. And it's one reason why we focus on building the technical capabilities of kind of some hand-selected NGOs right now.
Okay, cool. I mean, Kevin Paul, maybe specifically, maybe you have an example from your portfolio where, out of the skilling, employability, economic opportunity kind of space, where one of your partners just has been able to take what might have been NGO implemented at the start to really work with government and translate it into a wider system. I mean, maybe you walk us through one of your partners that's been able to do some of that work.
Well, I won't. In the livelihood space, I'll say it's hard, and I think one of the challenges that the philanthropies have been having, in the livelihood space, you'll find a lot of good livelihood organizations. You'll find that very very few of them have reached, a large scale. Let's say beyond like a few million people. And that's part of the reason why we are focused on livelihoods. One, is such an important issue, but two, we feel like there's maybe a lot of room for improvement. I'll give a quick example from the health space. We've been working with an organization, NeuroHealth, and really working with their tech team. And Neura has been expanding their program around kind of caregiver support to healthcare. In India, but now in different countries like Indonesia and so forth. And very much with this kind of, they're not going to be implementing directly, in countries so large. But they do have partnerships with the governments to roll out their program that they've helped develop for those settings. And so very much we've been working with Nura to help build technology, technology of different kinds, kind of A/B testing capabilities of different kinds, just as a way to help keep a finger on the pulse of just what's happening when someone else is implementing a program, in many, many places at once.
If it's so hard, and I saw Kevin, I saw you nod, I mean, what are some of those pain points that you observe as you work? Because as you said, you have a fellows program, you see if it has potential to invest further. Where do you see those pain points some of these nonprofit implementers have to make that transition? And maybe transition is already a debatable term. I think you've written about it. Other people, talk about it, that this conception of starting something, piloting something in a sort of isolated way, and then handing it over is may not a workable model. That we have to get to thinking from how do we start this from within with the demand of who will be that doer or payer at scale, right? So, I mean, what's been your experience on some of these pain points that your grantees, your partners face to get that government system integration?
Yeah, well, to give more of a big picture on that, and to note, we've learned everything we've learned from journeys like we started working with Nora when they had 0 employees, and to be working with them on alongside a colleague like Agency Fund, where we are of whom we are huge fans, is really kind of great to see that ecosystem come together. But more to your point, when we work with a founder and they have an idea, their first R&D stage is really they're a lab. But then they need to grow in order to prove some other things, like, just to show that this thing could actually work at bigger scales and is replicable and does have economies of scale. But then the huge transition is into that third stage where they're really a recruiter and enabler of others. And the degree to which an organization can make that transition once they've achieved the other two is the degree to which they can have true scale. And where we've been pretty primitive to date is as to how you really engage and work with governments, which is why we wrote what we did in that Big Aid is Over article, which is to say, we need to rethink that. We need to rethink how we really meet the needs of governments and how we understand what ideas are really useful to them and what the process is of helping them deliver them and really being of service to them. And that the value proposition of a lot of NGOs as they go to that third stage is that they can say, hey, we can come and with philanthropic support, help you sort of adapt and deliver this idea for yourselves. And that's what philanthropy can do at scale. That's its role at scale. So its role is to help develop ideas, help prove them out both as high impact and scalable ideas, and then work with what is mostly going to be governments to be able to own them and run them as government services and delivery.
Could I add a quick thing?
Yeah, sure.
I think there's a lot of there's a lot of work yet to be done before we draw really big conclusions. And I think one of the things is, I think there's a lot of work to be done just around the NGO government interface. That, it's been kind of a brick wall, a lot of in many cases, but there's room for improvement. So, for example, we're funding an entrepreneur, but who's working with governments to try to. She has different ways of framing it, but the one that resonated with me was, I recently renewed my residency permit in Kenya, and there's a website I went to that kind of like had the step-by-steps, and there's kind of like, there's a clear process for someone like me to be able to live legally in Kenya and pay taxes and so on and so forth. And it's like a clear, but if you're an NGO and you want to interface with the government, it's like you're in the jungle. And one way she framed it was like, well, what if we just had like a clear, like portal with like clear kind of like at least step by step. There'll always be like some areas of ambiguity, but that it's not a jungle. It's like the government's looking for, these are the government priorities. These are the things you need to show if you're an NGO and you want to like have a conversation with the government. These are the people you interact with, you interface with, who's maybe that's their job. It's not just like find your favorite director, your favorite minister, and try to work through them. All this to say that I think there's been a lot of frustration in the NGO government interface, but I wouldn't say the story is completely written in terms of, how good it can actually go. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. And similarly with the NGO World Bank interface, I think there's also a lot of room for improvement. And that's, Agency Fund has an MOU with the behavioral science unit of the World Bank to try to start peel back kind of some of the complexity of just like how to get NGOs to interface productively and legally with World Bank teams that might benefit from learning from what they're doing. So I think these are very important areas to continue exploring.
For sure, and we really want to get in there. And Cynthia, I was going to bring you in right now because we'll take it to that. I think, that's exactly where it's going to go. But maybe before we take it further into this, how do we get at working together differently, which was one of the key questions Sonia pointed out. But mean, from what you've heard as well on how Kevin, Paul think about that pathway to scale, et cetera. I mean, something that specifically stuck with you, or that's been different from your experience as you work with your partners, and then and then let's move into this kind of ecosystem. How do we work together? What's that interface kind of, which I think is really where we want to get to.
Sure. No, that sounds great. So just looking back at the notes I had taken, a lot of it comes back to what do we mean by scale and for whom and for what purpose. And I think that's one of the things where there is no standard. It's very nebulous. I like actually, Kevin, your definition of the doer at scale and the payer at scale, because I think often those are left till too late in the process. Like, this is a great idea. We think this is fantastic. Now who's going to pay for it? Who's going to buy it? And can we actually scale? And then I think that, Paul, that what you were saying about the role of technology is huge, and also the fact that technology needs to not also be brought in as an enabler late in the game, but technology needs to be built into the design process. And if you actually build it into from the very beginning, then you're going to have a better chance at scale. And then the third thing was really around this idea of transition to government. And this is the red thread of quite a lot of things, particularly on the venture side, are often built in isolation and then bolted onto something. Now this is great, let's go sell it to government, or let's go sell it to corporate, instead of really integrating that multi-stakeholder kind of design from the very beginning. And I think this is one of the red threads that also links back to why we set up the Innovation Foundation in the way we did, because we saw some recurring patterns, and then decided, let's try something slightly different. So we saw that there were lots of great ventures out there, but also not scaling, that there was often lack of access, not just to finance, but to other kinds of resources and connections. And then we saw that one of the key things was that often the broad enough array of stakeholders were not brought in from the very beginning. And then therefore that trying to bolt on and adjust and find someone to pay for, someone to buy later on, we felt was one of the things that was often keeping ventures from scaling. So what we did with the Innovation Foundation is we set up, we're the corporate foundation of the Adecco Group. So we've got the Adecco Group money and the Adecco Group kind of access and know-how behind us. But we set up as essentially a venture studio for society. So we called it a social innovation lab, but it's basically like a venture studio. So we'll find a problem out there that we think nobody is solving sufficiently. Maybe it's a problem that's new and we need to get ahead of it. Maybe it's a problem where there are lots of great actors, but they're not joined up, or there's just a need to look at it somewhat differently. And then we will then bring in various actors working on that topic from a lot of different perspectives, and then try to figure out what's the missing piece. Like, where is the pipe broken, and where could we find something additive? And that means that if we find the thing that's additive, then it will accelerate everybody else's work as well. And so it goes through this, what are we solving for? Then into the design, it will be similar to the stuff that you guys know, design thinking, co-creation, cycles of ideation, and then we build venture teams, and they turn the idea into a working product, and then it scales in the place where we built it, and then beyond that place, and with the audience for whom and with whom we built it, and then out to others. So it will be similar to what the ventures that you're funding are doing. We are just doing it basically in a centralized way, so that we start with the knowledge of what are the dozens of ventures, dozens of initiatives, lots of other actors in the field doing, and then where are the white spaces. And so the idea is that it's not in a way to compete with traditional grant-based funding, nor to compete with the entrepreneurs or the accelerators that are out there, but to basically figure out what's in the middle that could be that connective tissue. And it comes back to this idea of figuring out what kind of scale, and then who needs to be pulled in for that. The role of technology, for sure, and making sure technology is part of it from the very beginning. And then also this idea of, instead of building something and then transitioning to government or transitioning to a bigger scaling partner, trying to involve those potential scaling partners from the very beginning so that they've got skin in the game. And so that ideally, like an example is we're building a solution. This is not for youth. This is actually for mature workers, but working specifically with the job centers in the UK, with the idea that the job centers worldwide have lots of problems. If we can come up with the common problems that they've got specific to older workers, we'll design with the job centers, in the job centers, with the idea that then it becomes something that they can actually implement themselves. We'll kind of front load this as a flywheel. This is back to the who pays for it. We'll pay for it until there is a working model. We'll start with local job centers, then move to regional, then ideally scale across the UK, with the idea that if we prove that it works in the UK, then you can scale it into other countries that have job centers. And job centers are run obviously in lots of different ways, sometimes pure government, sometimes hybrid. There are private ones as well. But what I'm really excited about is how do you take that and then scale it into countries that want to create job centers, with the idea that you could leapfrog and you could come up with something better. So that's just kind of to take that red thread of the definitions, the role of tech, and then this hurdle of transition, because those were the key themes that I heard come out really strongly, both as opportunity as challenges.
No, thank you. And then let's take that sort of the forward looking, because we've done a bit more on the retrospective essentially and experience and where we're struggling. But so if we're forward looking then, and so from some of the things I heard, obviously clearly where philanthropic community has that clear role in kind of proving out an idea, getting these things started, having that sort of de-risking and that venture capital in a way. But we've also heard that, we can't just try to put it onto government late in the game. The question is, how do we solve, Kevin, you mentioned that, how do we solve their problems? How do we get better at that? Right. And Paul, you mentioned essentially that interface that we have right now in this ecosystem, be this between the NGOs and the government, the NGOs with World Bank, et cetera. Still, we haven't maybe quite figured that out yet. So maybe let me just put it back to you briefly before we jump to the audience and bring them in as well. In your work, as you've sort of faced maybe some of these challenges of your own foundation in the work with your grantees or partners to really make that transition to government demand, to the linkage to government systems, right, with its own bureaucratic animal, where do you see or have come to see that maybe wish or potential of having a stronger link with an institution like the World Bank, which supports governments, right? Which provides where governments are funding. These are loans typically, governments are funding, but something seems to be missing between these two, right? Because governments, when they do fund, they're risk averse. Sometimes it's more infrastructure focused. Sometimes some ideas have been around. It's not necessarily maybe some of the newer things. Where do you see that maybe that World Bank could play a different role? How this ecosystem between philanthropy, World Bank, government, NGOs could work differently? Give us some ideas, and then we'll jump to the audience and bring them in.
Yeah, sure. So I've never worked at the World Bank. I'm not a World Bank expert, but I'll just describe it in my own words, what we've been trying. In essence, we've been setting up little forums where NGOs that we would recommend can rub shoulders with people at the World Bank or in the World Bank ecosystem, just to raise awareness of different sorts of ideas that are out there. So, for example, there's an organization based in Togo that has been called Kabaku, that has been creating kind of like a WhatsApp, AI-supported WhatsApp tool to connect youth entrepreneurs to each other. And they do really, really nice work. No one would ever know who Kabaku is otherwise, other than, we introduced Kabaku to, we had them attend some World Bank conferences and had them give some brown bag lunches. And there were a few task teams that took interest, and they're like, well, actually, this could be applicable in our contexts. And I think that just something as simple as that, at least for the bank, could already be making be making some headway, and it's not that complicated. One of the things from the NGO's point of view that is important, I think, especially working with the bank and with the government, is to kind of change this mindset that like success does not necessarily mean that more money is flowing through your budget, right? If your idea is taken up by one of these ecosystem players, and then you're able to support them how you can, that may already be a massive success. But it's not the traditional success that they may be measuring themselves, in the first 5 years of their organization when they started. But it's a different sort of success that would be quite large. So we've mapped out different ways that, once an idea is in the World Bank ecosystem, that actually kind of through government partners, through specific country agreements, kind of actually reach a large number of people, and we're learning by doing in these sorts of situations. And then yeah, on the government side, I'd say the one formal thing is working through a Tanzanian entrepreneur to really clean up the interface, because right now, and I've been in these shoes before. Right now, it really is a jungle trying to, like, who do you talk to? What do you talk to them about? And there's no real like established way. So just to clean up that interface and make it a bit more regular, but the governments do have structures which on paper would make them pay attention, right? Like many of them have like, I think government Tanzania has like a 2050 like development goals, and that changes or it stays stable across administrations, and it's always a touch point to like, how are we relating to those goals? There are certain kind of like, and then like, with livelihoods and youth. I mean, I live in Kenya, so I mean, for sure, Ruto cares about this issue, right? Like the government cares about this issue. So
Right.
somehow I just have a bit of optimism to say there's a way to crack this nut, because there are real fundamental interests that are aligned. It's just something gets lost in the interface somehow. But I feel like there's a lot of room for improvement.
Kevin, what about you? Where do you see that, that bridge could help, where the World Bank maybe help bring in some of that energy, or, from philanthropy with NGOs, or growing into a conversation where it becomes more about government as implementer and or funder?
Well, I confess I don't really know what the World Bank does, so I can only really talk about this from the point of view of a founder trying to scale something up via government. And what we tell them is this: go toward potential. Just because you started in Tanzania doesn't mean that that's the most likely government to scale it up. And if you do go and work with a government, create relationships with the right individuals, the right people, make them real relationships with real people, and send your A team to do it. And then we learned so much from sales, the idea that the fundamental concept of sales is to become the solution to their problem, which means you have to make sure that they have a problem that you can be the answer to. And those are the fundamental things we're teaching people. And then, of course, talk to them early enough so that they can have a major role in adapting your idea to meet their needs. And those are the fundamentals now for us to help founders successfully work with governments once their idea is proven to be worth scaling and scalable.
Sounds good. Let's hand it over to the audience for a little bit. There may have been some questions in the chat already, but feel free to raise your hand. So if you've written something in the chat or not, just raise your hand, very briefly say who you are, and then a concise question so we can get in a few ideally before the hour.
I have another thing to add to what we were just talking about in just a moment.
Sounds good. So let's see if there's someone who wants to jump in. Any hands right now? Either on the scaling experiences or on that role of, improving the linkages from philanthropy NGO to government and the bank, the role the bank can play in it. I saw, I think, a question by Sabine.
There was one from Rob a little earlier as well.
There was Rob earlier. I mean, I would, sometimes questions, some get answered. So I would encourage that show of hand to make sure you wanna ask it live as well.
There is a hand from Aya Emanuel.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't see that. Perfect.
Hello, good evening from my own part. This is Aya Emmanuel Bori from Sierra Leone, West Africa. My question is that I'm the CEO of Yomata Youth Commerce Association. We have an agri-tech innovation hub we are transforming young people into agricultural technology and innovation. But my question is, how can you link our business investment plan, Philanthropy or World Bank Group in our sub-region, maybe Sierra within our country, so that we can able to expand, because we have developed our investment plan for 5 years, and we have submitted those plans setting on agri-tech model. Every model document we have it. So how can we be linked to the bank and other institutions, because we be the youth members, World Bank Group, for since 2023 to date. How we have developed most of the idea, can they be linked to the bank? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And maybe we'll take another one right now, and then the panelists can also pick, what they can best respond to. I see a question by you, Bosley. Feel free to come in, but I think it's about how do we think about quality versus quantity, and I think that's a really pertinent question for all these human service type interventions, because as we grow, as we scale, quality can be an issue, and how do we think about that? How should we think about that? I assume that's what this is about, but you feel free to also jump in and reframe your own question.
We have 2 more hands from Simon and Rebecca. So if it's okay with you, we can take those 2 as well.
Let's take those, and then we'll hand it back to the panel.
Perfect.
Okay,
Simon,
thank
please
you,
go ahead.
Kevin. Yes, my name is Simon Sellström. I'm founder and CEO of Directed Development. And what we do is identify and develop top tech prodigies in Africa for global roles, so working remotely. So it's in the job creations and education space. Now, my question is about scaling and the issues regarding visibility and corruption. And so I think one of the things, as you grow larger, you get a bit of a principal agent type of problem. And just on a practical note, like what should I as a CEO founder think about as we expand across the continent? And I'm just curious to hear any thoughts about that. So I have a co-founder who's Ethiopian, and I'm sort of based in the UK. So we're in charge of different sides of the market. But this is broadly something that's like a known unknown for me that I'd love to hear your inputs on.
Thank you. And I think there was one other that we had.
Yeah, hi, I can come in. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm the Executive Director of Labor Mobility Partnerships, and we are working on livelihoods unlocks, but specifically for cross-border employment. So that's responding to the diverging demographic futures of high and low-income countries and leveraging that as an opportunity to expand employment for people born in low-income countries. And so my question was around how you think about scaling in the context of systemic barriers. So for us, what we're looking to do, we're looking to get to hundreds of millions of workers placed given the demographic gaps in need. And we're looking to do that through similarly kind of scaling up individual direct service providers themselves. But then the kind of big existential question for us is that in many markets, the constraint is it's visa laws, right? It's policy barriers. So I gave the example of when Korea doubled its employment permit system, that led to immediately 700,000 new jobs that were immediately filled from kind of the 14 low-income countries that service that market, and almost 2 billion annual remittances, right? So that's a magnitude of impact that none of us through direct delivery could kind of hope to achieve ourselves. But at the same time, the ability to use philanthropic investment to actually influence those systemic barriers is very unpredictable, right? So I'm wondering how you grapple with where scale is constrained by systemic barriers, and then how to actually leverage funding in a way that gives you some confidence of moving them.
Thank you, Rebecca. So let's bring it back to the panel. Feel free to pick and choose where you feel like, you have an answer. You don't need to respond to all of them each, but Kevin, let me start with you.
Okay, well, question 1 was a great question. I just would need a lot more time and detail to answer it. The last 3 questions are kind of related. which is the quality versus quantity question is one we need to stop asking, which is to say, what we often do is we develop an idea, the organization delivers it, and then they try to scale it up to the doer at scale, and then they're sad because the doer at scale can't do it as well as they did, which is what they should have done is work with the doer at scale first and set the standard there, because the other is universally disappointing and universally kind of irrelevant. And then the third question about this sort of corruption and other barriers, other problems, your idea has to be able to swim in the sea that it finds itself. You can't change that ocean. You just have to be able to swim in it. So you need to deeply understand the ocean and how you develop a fish that can thrive in it. You can't change that, which goes to the third question is, as you develop an idea and grow it, you start to understand what policies will either open the door for you or let you get over a barrier. And there are ways in which you can change the sea you swim in, and you need to figure out if those are reasonable and which ones are priority and you need to work on. And again, if you have a really coherent scale strategy, this is the kind of thing you can sell to philanthropy. I need to work on this policy change, and it's going to unlock all this other stuff. So that's the best I can do with those four.
Thank you, Kevin. Paul.
There are a few, I'm going to talk about a pet topic, which is data, and there are a few questions related to that.
But let me just make us aware, because I do know Kevin has a hard deadline around one. So maybe, you know, relatively shortish, so we don't lose Kevin and still have
I have a little more time.
Oh, okay, that's better. We all like that. So anyway, so still, then go ahead. Go ahead, Paul.
Well, I do have a hard stop, unfortunately, but I'll be quick.
All right.
I've had a number of conversations with the LSMS team at the bank, and they're very smart and advising on a number of our efforts. But always stuck in my mind is that it's not uncommon for the bank and other actors to spend $100 per survey or more sometimes for one data point from one person. And with that kind of benchmark price in mind, you know, I'm speaking to Aya, who, you know, he's talking about like this tech ag business he's running in Senegal. Also Hugh about quality and quantity. And then Sarah, you had this question about country data policies. I think a lot of these schemes, if you're able to generate good data, and those data can give insight into the economic well-being and lives of, in our case, young people. Don't underestimate how valuable those data might be. Because again, you know, the bank traditionally will pay $100 just for one data point from one person at one point in time. But if you have some technology that's generating data continuously, etc., that can be a huge avenue both for your business plan, your kind of business, but also a huge avenue to leveraging in terms of how you know that something might actually be improving someone's life. So I just wanted to kind of put that thought in people's minds, especially before the call ends, because it's a potentially huge area. And I've had a number of conversations recently with tech companies, either app makers all the way to mobile network operators to virtual banks. And in essence, the tenor of the conversation has been, if you let us have access to your data, we can bring in some philanthropic energy to help make your customers better off. And my hit rate is close to 100% of people who are willing to actually share their data, companies. So I think that's just like one angle that also merits a lot more exploration in terms of this, like, if there's good data around, what can be done to bring out some innovative solutions.
Cynthia, you wanted to also add on to something?
It's actually a nice segue from what Paul was just saying. So back to what the World Bank can do, I think what the World Bank has is the neutrality and the global reach. And so what I would suggest is that The bank could basically orchestrate like a pincer move, because you've got at the top level, from if you think top down, bottom up, top down, you've got the ear of the governments. You can say, you know, we've got this, trust us, we will do the vetting for you, or we'll create the things that don't exist yet through things like the Youth Employment Lab. And so if you say, okay, we've got this, let us, you know, put some money in, and we will be the interface. We'll be the guarantee for you. And then from the bottom up, if you actually then help founders, help innovators understand how to better work with government from the very beginning and co-create from the very beginning, then you have kind of the vetted, the created, the well-run to then take back up to the government, whom you said, you know, we've got this. So if you can be the interface, create the trust, create the pool of vetted ventures of different types that are well supported with data, with the ability to co-create with government, then you become the interface, you become the glue, the connective tissue. I think that's where the bank can really play.
Thank you. So I am conscious of time, and we won't get into maybe some of the mechanics. I think that's where it gets interesting as to, you know, how could some of these mechanics of glue and, you know, interface look like. But you know, hopefully we can maybe take some of these offline and continue the conversation. But I think what's really interesting to have heard that there is this consensus that, you know, also the philanthropic community feels like they have a clear role in that pipeline and that value chain of helping social innovations start and grow and increase the capabilities of these partners to get ready. But for what, right? And it's not a purpose in by itself. It is get ready for that integration, for that, you know, being able to feed into and with government systems. And that means, you know, like Paul, like you said, like, you know, whose problem are we solving, and being very conscious of, you know, of that, and having the building the fish that can swim in, you know, that ocean with the constraints that are there. So I think that's key. So let me, as we wrap up, give you each a chance for last few words of what you want to say. You know, maybe is there and youth skilling livelihood solution you're really excited about that you deserve hasn't gotten to the scale it should? Is there something out there, or is there a plea you have to us, you know, in the World Bank, to how Philanthropic and World Bank can better work together? Last thoughts, and then we'll wrap it up. Thank you.
I'll just say some really quick.
Go ahead.
I think, yeah, I think we're definitely not near the frontier of what's possible in the area of youth livelihoods. So that gives me optimism. And then, but then also there's absolutely no time to waste. And, you know, AI is real now. You know, people are on the streets now. It really is no time to waste as well. So maybe some impetus as well as a little bit of optimism.
Thank you. Kevin?
Well, when I think of most of this stuff that we're talking about here, I think of Africa, because that's the one place where economic growth per capita has been flatlined for a long time. And so overall, the paradigm of what encourages economic growth is really what we're most interested in, and where we're most trying to explore what the hell is the role for philanthropy in something that big. But if we can't make it happen, most of what we do is honestly kind of rearranging the deck chairs. And I would just say at the end, when I say I don't know what the World Bank does, I kind of mean that. It's sort of above my pay grade, but also I've worked with hundreds of social entrepreneurs now. We have a portfolio of 80 organizations that we're funding that have gone through our fellows program. I've never heard of them talk about the World Bank in any of their scale strategies. I mean, literally not once. And when I've had the conversations with all of you there, it just seems like you have all kinds of interesting ideas. What Paul just raised with Agency Fund, they're smart enough to reach out to you and do something really useful. but somehow our social entrepreneurs, they don't know how to work with the World Bank. And I'd love to see a lot more happen, because I don't think they even know, certainly I don't know exactly what resources the World Bank has to bring to bear that is of great use to them.
Thank you. And we will continue, by the way, because we will have some of your grantees in 2 weeks, and we'll look at it from their perspective, such as Meta in India. We will have a session in India. We have a Udyam Learning Foundation that's been also able to scale. So just to say, we'll turn it around, look at it from the social innovator side that have been able to make some of these inroads with state governments. So that's February 19th, save the date. It'll be coming too. But yes, also Paul, Kevin, we'll take that conversation also happily offline to kind of keep thinking, what to make of that potential and how to, integrate better. I think that's the good thing. That is a frontier, Paul, as you're saying. There is something we can improve there, and I think that's great. Cynthia, your last words of wisdom,
Sure.
and then.
We're actually starting this new thing called the Foundry, where we're going to start training practitioners in the field of social innovation, so entrepreneurs and others, they might be entrepreneurs as well, into our methodology so they can take it and use it, change it, whatever. But I feel like the thing that we are weak on is that government interface bit. So this is a bit of a call to action. If people have examples of how co-creating with government from the ground up has worked really well, please let us know, and we'll figure out how to highlight those as examples and to kind of weave that into this set of skills that we give people. And this is part of our mandate to just open source and share everything we do, everything we learn, so that others can use it and ideally leapfrog.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you to all our participants and in the audience, for staying on. And, we in S4YE, we look forward to taking some of these conversations forward. So, and as I said, you will also, we'll let you know about the series. This is the start of a conversation we're kicking off, but we will continue. The next one already on February 19, and then other ones as well with great partners, Generation Junior Achievement, some others in India that I just mentioned. So this is, we'll try to explore it from different angles.
This is great. This is really important work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.